We're live. Although we can still answer the bat question. Where did you get your bats from?
I think these came from maybe H&M a few years ago. Actually, they've got a bit mangled over the years. Yours are slightly more sparkly looking.
Yeah, but I did just walk into the light fitting and hit the witch's hat.
They're fantastic. Where are yours from?
Claire's Accessories. It was my first time I've ever been in there. So yeah, we've got one in my local town, but I've never gone inside.
I'm clearly going to have to go to Claire's Accessories and get an update on mine.
And I've got my Whitby mug.
Oh, fantastic.
I have a caring for a demon cat one.
Oh, that's brilliant. Do you have a demon cat?
No. No, I'm rolling with my mum's idea of I've got a husband and that's the pet enough.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. When we were little and we asked my mum for a pet, she always used to say, "We've got your dad." And that's enough.
Fair enough.
Keeping the theme going.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, carry on.
As we're live, let's start off with an introduction to you and your books. Starting with Sarah. Or do you want to be Sarah or Rhiannon on this one?
Either. I'll be Rhiannon. I write gothic thrillers as Rhiannon Ward. I also write contemporary crime as Sarah Ward. My first one was The Quickening, which came out last year, set in the 1920s after the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic, and it's set around an old house where the contents are being photographed, ready for its sale. So and then various things start to happen there. And then my next book, which has just come out, called The Shadowing, is set in the 1830s. So I went back 100 years and did, completely different research for that time period. And that's set in between Bristol and the Nottinghamshire Workhouse in Southall. So those are my two books.
Anna?
Fantastic, thank you. It's funny how much overlap there is really between Sarah and I's work, and I think we really need to do more events together.
Yeah, we should.
Given we have the same publicist. So my first one was set in the 1830s, The Unseeing, but that is not real. I mean, it does have a ghost in it at one point, but it's more sort of historical crime than it is supernatural. But that was based on the life of a real woman who was convicted of murder in 1837. So that was my first one. My second one, The Storykeeper, also 19th century, but slightly later, 1857, set on the Isle of Skye. And it's about a young folklorist who escapes London to become a folklorist assistant on the Isle of Skye and search out the stories of the people. But at the same time, she becomes aware of young girls going missing. So a gothic mystery with potential supernatural elements. And then my third one, which is coming out in January, The Clockwork Girl, here's an early proof, is also another gothic mystery with possible hints of magic or the supernatural, but it's set in Paris in 1750, and it's partly about an automaton maker, so a maker of creepy dolls, but it's partly based on the real scandal of the vanishing children of Paris of 1750. So again, we've kind of got that missing children link as well, which is interesting.
I love your cover, the new cover.
It's beautiful, isn't it? This is actually just the proof cover, but they've made the proof really pretty, but the actual cover for the hardback is absolutely stunning. It's I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but Michaela Kaina. So she's this fantastic designer who's done lots of, the binding she did, and Ariadne. I think, lots of covers you'll have seen. She's really, really good. So I was absolutely thrilled when they got her on board.
Brilliant.
That was Rachel.
Oh, is she trying to dial in?
Yeah, she's having some problems getting in. We'll get her eventually, hopefully. Okay. What drew you both to writing gothic fiction?
Sarah,
I always wanted to write a ghost story, actually. So I'd written contemporary crime because that was what I was reading. But alongside all my sort of crime novels that I read from a child, I was also reading ghost stories. And so I always fancied writing a ghost story, and I tried to put supernatural in my crime thrillers, and my editor wasn't having any of it. No supernatural in a police procedural, thank you very much. So I wrote The Quickening as a ghost story, and I think gothic is the word of the moment, isn't it, really? Yeah. So I feel I wrote a ghost story, but it has the gothic elements of, you know, sort of people in peril, decaying house, element of the supernatural. So I just wanted to write a ghost story, and I think the gothic elements are very sort of relevant for now. So I've sort of embraced it more in my second book, which is very gothic, very early gothic.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so like you, my first one wasn't really, I mean, it had a slight gothic tinge, but it was more crime, really, more sort of historical crime. And then my second one, for the Story Keeper, I knew I wanted to write a dark fairy tale. So I ended up going back to, I mean, I did a lot of rereading Du Maurier, who's one of my gothic faves. So, you know, Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel, books I absolutely love, to try and get that atmosphere. But I mean, but also, you know, Shirley Jackson, I absolutely adore. So that sort of gothic flavour is what I was going for with my second book. And then I just got more and more creepy, basically, as my career goes on. So my third one, The Clockwork Girl, is probably, I mean, it's still gothic, but it's definitely scarier in that, you know, it's creepy moving dolls, and you know, it's supposed to be not horror, but you know, slightly frightening. And then the one I'm writing at the moment is a ghost story. It's a ghost story set in fascist Italy. So
brilliant.
I've gone, yeah. So it's interesting because yours is 1920s, and then I've gone 1930s. So yeah, my next one is supposed to be quite frightening.
That's good.
I think it's frighteningly bad at the moment, but hopefully by the time I've rewritten it, it will be scarier. So I've been doing a lot of reading of Michelle Pava.
Yeah.
Oh, have we got Rachel coming in?
Yay!
Yay!
I'm so sorry, my webcam wouldn't work.
That's all right. Good to
Sorry.
see you.
It's okay.
Oh, brilliant.
Do you wanna leap in and give us an introduction, Rachel, to you and your books?
Okay, hi, my name's Rachel. So I write as R P Bolton. I'm just going to get that. I don't actually have a paperback copy of my book yet because it's not out yet. But this is my first, if I can get the picture up, this is my first psychological thriller with HarperCollins. So, it's called The Perfect House. And yeah, it's about some people who buy a house at auction, and they get more than they were expecting when they go it.
Sounds great.
I see that someone's asked us, have we ever seen a ghost for real? Disappointingly, I haven't. I've definitely felt ghostly present. I've definitely been places where I felt that there was some kind of unusual presence. In particular, I went to a kennel. I don't know if any of you've been to Kennel Vale in Cornwall, and I just it's basically a disused mine or gunpowder factory that's now sort of grown over. And I had this really, just walking around, I just had this real feeling that we were not alone. And of course I looked it up, and there are lots of stories of ghosts there. So I've definitely felt things, but I've never actually seen anything.
Yeah, the same here. So I live in an old cottage, and when I bought it, the people who'd been renovating it said that that a workman had seen somebody in Victorian work clothes come out through a door and go through the house. And I didn't really think too much of it, but I've definitely seen things out of the corner of my eye. In fact, I see it all the time. My television switches itself on, my fire alarm goes off when there's no battery in it, and it's just the various things, but nothing scary. It's just slightly some activity that goes on in the house, really.
What about you, Rachel?
I haven't seen one, but one of the ideas that I based my book on was a girl I went to school with, who went to the same university as me. She was a couple of years older, and she said on the first night in her rented house, all the girls were sitting on the sofa just watching the TV, and she suddenly saw this woman just stand by the TV in like a sort of, you know, high-necked dress, and she just stood there. And then she turned and looked at the other girls on the sofa, and all the others were just watching the TV apart from one other. And they just looked at each other and just went, "Did you see that?" And they'd seen exactly the same thing. And this girl is so, I mean, she's a home economics teacher, you know, she's so down to earth. It's unbelievable. And she, you know, it was just the only thing I've ever really heard that's made me think, it just gave me shivers, really made me think there might be something going on.
Yeah.
But well, not me. I think I'd run away if I saw a ghost.
Well, I've been reading, because my next one, I was just saying, my next one I'm writing is a ghost story, and it is specifically, I'm ruining it for you now, but you'll hopefully have forgotten by the time it comes out. is Poltergeist. So I've been reading an awful
brilliant.
lot about the paranormal and about ghosts. And I mean, my husband thinks it's all nonsense, and I keep saying to him, but it's not. But particularly with Poltergeist, the phenomena are so consistent. So many people encounter the same experiences. I mean, are all these people just, you know, mad at the same time? I don't think so. I think they're. I mean, I don't fully understand what it is and what is going on now, but you know, there is clearly something happening and some force that we don't entirely understand. And in fact, I don't know if you've read, is it Caroline Mitchell who's written The Paranormal Intruder, which is absolutely terrifying. Now, Caroline is a crime writer. Some of you will know her, but she was also subject to some really quite horrific poltergeist phenomena, which she wrote about in this book. I think it was the first book she ever wrote. And she's an ex-copper. She's very, you know, down to earth. There's no, you know, and it's all just what she says is so credible. So, you know, you're looking for a terrifying Halloween read. have a real story. It's really, really interesting. But I noticed that someone, interestingly, Laura's asked, she said she loved the ambiguity in Rachel's book. Is it the ghost or is it someone messing around with her head? And I think that's really interesting because I'm wondering, so the ghost book I'm writing at the moment, the way it ends at the moment, it is a poltergeist. Like, you get to the end and it is. But what my agent has said when she's read it is, I think you should enter in, you know, I think you should make it ambiguous. I think you should make it could be explained away by it being someone else. And I don't know whether that's right. I mean, my agent is usually right, but I don't know. I mean, you know, what do you think? Do you always think it's better to end with some note of ambiguity?
Well, I did in The Quickening because I, like you, I thought, well, I want people to read it who just don't believe in ghosts.
Yeah.
So it needs to be that sort of ambiguity that it could be a rational explanation. But because I do believe in ghosts, I wanted people who do to sort of have that option as well. But for my second book, I just wanted to embrace the whole ghost thing. So there's no ambiguity at all. Yeah. My main character hears ghosts and sees them. So, yeah, I think you should do what you want to, really.
Yeah, well, I'm about to start rewriting and maybe I'll see how it pans. Maybe just add a tiny note. But I was thinking about, you know, I don't know how many of you have read The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, which is just one of my favourites, my absolute favourites. Those of you who haven't read it, you should all read it. It's absolute, I mean, that's Poltergeist as well. But there isn't really any ambiguity there. It is definitely, you know, something supernatural. And that obviously works. Anyway, I don't know.
Why did you make yours ambiguous, Rachel?
I think because I was writing about pregnancy and I wrote the main character has preeclampsia, which I had, and then afterwards I was kind of you know, in a bit of a state, and I just wanted to write about that and you know, write a bit about postnatal depression and how it can affect you, and especially when you're quite isolated when you've had a baby and you kind of feel a bit cut off, especially if your family are away from where you are and something like that. So yeah, I just wanted that ambiguity of whether it was a ghost or not, and you know, you can kind of make your own mind up when you read it. But I was thinking about, there's a series on BBC Sounds at the moment that you might like. That's it's called The Uncanny, and it's the guy who did the Battersea Poltergeist, and he's investigating real sort of hauntings at the moment. And I was walking my dog, one of my dogs, the other day, listening to it on the podcast. And I actually had to stop listening to it because I was walking through this sort of wood and I was so frightened by what he said. And that really rarely happens to me, but I was on my own, you know, just with headphones in. And I had to take the headphones out. So, yeah, I'd really recommend that. It's called The Uncanny. I can't remember what the guy's name is, but it's brilliant.
Oh, fantastic. That's exactly my new novel is all, you know, the third one is all about the uncanny, obviously, you know, that horrible feeling you get when you're not sure whether something is real or not real. And, you know, the central concept of the novel is about this machine who may or may not be real. So, yeah, I definitely need to have a listen to that. Thank you.
You ever tempted to set your novels in somewhere like a real spooky kind of haunted place?
Ooh. So my one, The Shadowing, is based in a real place. So it's Southall Workhouse, and it's open to the public now. The National Trust own it, and they've got they've completely renovated it, so it looks most of it looks like the Victorian workhouse that it was, but it was still housing people in the 1960s. So all the unmarried mothers were put in this sort of room at the top. So they've kept part of the room from the 1960s, and people come and visit who said, well, I was brought up there. And it's got a really, really weird feel to it, because they split the poor into the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. So you've got the deserving poor women, the undeserving poor women. And, the stories are sort of heartbreaking, which of course make it very spooky. So the shadowing's set in a real place.
Great. What about you, Rachel?
I think the one that Perfect House is kind of based on sort of the area that I live in, which I don't want to say, because there is actually a street named after it around here. And when I started writing it, I had a different name for the street, and then my agent said, no, change the name of the street. It sounds a bit what did she say, middle grade. So I changed the name of the street. Then I realised it's the name of a street near where I live, and then I got a bit worried that the people who lived in the house think I've written about their house, and I really hadn't. But there are elements of sort of the area that I live in.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, all of my stories and everything, it's always tend to be. I mean, I guess this is all writers do this. They take things from real life and they sort of twist them. So that the spooky house in The Story Keeper, the sort of Gothic mansion, is actually based on a Scottish house called Newhales, which is a very beautiful but rather spooky looking mansion, which I'm sure has a few ghosts of its own. And all of my stories tend to come from real stories. So part of the inspiration for the story I'm writing at the moment, the ghost story I'm writing at the moment, were the poltergeist of the 1830s, and specifically a woman who from Thornton Heath, in fact, who was subject to various rather horrific goings on in 1938, and how that was then rooted in her own trauma.
So was that Alma Fielding? Was that?
That's it.
Yeah,
very good.
yeah.
So the one Kate Summerscale then wrote. Yeah, I had a minor panic when her book came out. So I was like, oh no, same case. But obviously hers is non-fiction. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, Mother, if you haven't read it. But yeah, exactly. So this woman who, apparently normal housewife, and then, really very peculiar stuff starts happening to her. And of course, part of the interesting thing is how much of it is real and how much of it is a fraud, which is obviously something that is explored in all of the poltergeist cases. The Enfield poltergeist is the most famous one. And in fact, I've been scaring myself. To be honest, I'm not very easily scared, which probably is why I am. But the Enfield poltergeist recordings, I don't know if anyone records to them. Oh my God, they are really, with these girls, and that's at one point in the recordings, the girl's voice suddenly morphs into that of sort of an old man, and is this kind of old man's voice coming from her throat, and it's just really, really unnerving. But anyway, I see that someone's asked which.
Yeah, it's T.G. Campbell who's asked it. So I had a sneaky peek on my phone. It's such a good question. Thought we should credit it with who it came from. So what elements do you think should be in every good ghost story?
Yes, I thought about this recently because I was doing a talk on Gothic and ghostly fiction for Alderney Gothic Festival, which sadly I couldn't actually go to because I was worried I had COVID and I didn't want to kill off the island of Alderney. I thought that might be a bit Gothic. But I was thinking about, when we think about which scary stories really work, why are they so effective? I mean, I think a lot of it's to do with creating the atmosphere and setting and making it sort of your own world, and a world from which your characters can't escape and are locked into. I mean, part of it's the same as for any good storytelling, which is the, characters we can believe in and root for, because if you're not scared for your character, no one's going to care. I mean, I don't know, what do the rest of you think?
Yeah, I agree about Oh, sorry, no, Rachel, you go first.
I was just going to say that for me, the ones that are the most scary are the ones that I could really imagine happening to me. So, when it's very domestic, really, rather than in a big spooky castle, which would seem quite alien to me. If it's just sort of set in an ordinary house, and I think it'd be scarier the more modern it is, because you don't sort of associate modern houses with hauntings. So I think the sort of scarier ghost stories are the ones that seem more more sort of contemporary, more real at the moment. Although obviously, you know, the sort of older ones. Like I read This House is Haunted by John Boyne. I don't know if you read it.
Oh yes, I did read that a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really scary. And like for mine, for The Perfect House, I used the yellow wallpaper as yeah. So that was part of the sort of inspiration for it. So I think where it's set in the home, the sort of domestic hauntings, I find quite spooky.
Yeah, I'm the same. I completely agree that, you know, it's sort of finding the sort of liminal spaces. You know, liminal is one of those words that everyone uses now, but, you know, the sort of space between one state and another, sort of empty schools, motorway service stations, when these sort of transient places are often really, really creepy. And I think what's quite interesting is sort of setting it in times that are quite transient as well, because the 1930s strikes me as a sort of transient time between the 20s and then the Second World War. And it's like, you know, and the 1830s was exactly the same. It was between, you know, the old-fashioned coach journeys and the advent of rail travel and one king dying and Queen Victoria coming and a new age. And these times are often really, really spooky, or allow something spooky to happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think when Rachel was talking about the yellow wallpaper, I mean, I think that reminded me that for me, my sort of favourite scary stories, ghost stories, gothic stories tend to be those which are sort of rooted in the psychological. So obviously the yellow wallpaper is an incredible example of that. We sort of go mad with her. But, you know, also The Little Stranger is, you know, it's linked into his psyche. And so many of the best ones are, I think, you know, Stephen King, obviously Carrie was his first one, which is very obviously psychological, but also, you know, The Shining. I mean, you know, a lot of the ones that I think really, really hit home are the ones where we journey with the character and we become frightened and we go mad with them. And I think that's why a lot of really successful ghost stories are often written in the first person, because I think we just end up sort of seeing through their eyes and being them as they go on this, you know, terrifying journey. But it was interesting. I've been reading, as I say, a lot of Michelle Pavor. So for those of you who haven't read her, Thin Air, Dark Matter, her two, I think, the scariest ones, and they are properly scary. But they are. One of the most amazing things about them is that sense of place and atmosphere, and, you know, being in this frozen and hostile territory. I was thinking, how does she do it? And then I sort of started looking up some interviews with her. And even she was admitting that she doesn't find it easy to get there. But she said that she'd the first draft she'd done of Thin Air, I think, she'd found that it was sort of like a boy's own adventure. And it wasn't until she went and actually spent some time in the Arctic and sort of savouring some of those details, like, you know, the noise that a tent makes at night. There's, you know, the creepy things that you can put in to put the reader in place. So I thought that was really interesting.
I was thinking of something Rachel said about it being modern. I think one of my favourite horror authors is this guy called Paul Tremblay.
Oh yeah.
My favourite book of his is A Head Full of Ghosts, which is like a really modern kind of exorcism. What's your favourite Halloween read? If you had to pick just one, what would it be?
I prefer ghost stories rather than complete novels. So I read a lot of ghost stories. So I probably choose one of the sort of short stories. Anna mentioned Shirley Jackson. I mean, The Lottery. I mean, it's not a ghost story, but it's a proper gothic short story about a group of villagers where there's a lottery to decide who's the sort of sacrifice, really. And when she wrote it, she had loads and loads of, I think it appeared in the New Yorker, and she had loads and loads of letters of complaint. And I think that's a really successful story, isn't it? That people are outraged.
Yeah.
And some people wanted to visit the village. You know, they thought it was like actually happened. And because I live in a village, and, you know, sort of we all know each other, and I can imagine it. Well, I can't imagine that particular situation, but the sort of claustrophobia and having to sort of sacrifice yourself for the greater good. So I'd probably reread The Lottery by Shirley Jackson.
Rachel, what would you go for?
I think The Shining. I think that's the one of my all-time favourite books, and I read it when I was about. I was far too young, I think. I was probably about 12. and it terrified me, but I've always loved it. I've reread it, and I just think it's a brilliant book. It's absolutely terrifying. And I made my son watch the original Jack Nicholson film with
How
me.
old is your son?
15.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, no. Who's 1 minute is Peppa Pig, the next is The Shining. But so I made him watch it a couple of years ago, and he just wasn't fazed by it at all. He just didn't think it was scary or anything. So I don't know whether they're just more sort of used to it, but I found it terrifying.
Oh, I remember.
It's an absolutely amazing book.
Yeah, I remember watching the movie when I was far too young, when I was on a drama course, and being absolutely terrified for it. But yeah, like you, I reread The Shining recently, and just it's absolutely brilliant. But I tried to get my husband to read it, and he read like a couple of chapters, and he's like, Anna, I can't read this. He was just too disturbed by it. And I was like, oh God, does he know what I write? But yeah, if I had to choose one, I'd go Shirley Jackson as well. But it would be We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which is one of my favourite novels ever, and again has that kind of small town, absolutely claustrophobic atmosphere, but also a very peculiar and damaged child, Catherine Blackwood, who is narrating the story. I just think it is so creepy and so original, and I've probably read it about 5 times. I just think it's a work of genius. But interestingly, Shirley Jackson, and in fact, I was reading about the lottery and how she wrote the lottery. And Shirley Jackson spent most of her non-writing time looking after a large brood of children. And apparently she wrote the lottery after going grocery shopping with her 2-year-old. And she came home from the grocery shopping when clearly everyone had pissed her off, put her child in a playpen and sat down and wrote the lottery.
Wow.
I love that and apparently she would tell herself stories when she was doing all the domestic chores. So it was like from her frustration that all of that gothic stuff came. And I think because Rachel was talking about how the domestic can be actually the most frightening. And I think that really comes through in Shirley Jackson, that a lot of her stuff is, about small town communities and families that are just totally messed up. Yeah.
I think The Haunting of Hill House is the most terrifying thing I've ever read.
That's good.
Yeah, I love that book. Yeah.
I know. I had to read it. So one of Sam's favourite questions, our other author chat host, it's not on the screen, is tell us the most recent scene that you wrote without giving away a spoiler. I love it because you always get a really interesting answer. I'm just stealing her question forever.
As in what we're writing at the moment?
Yeah, so what you're writing at the moment, tell us your most recent scene, if you can, without giving away a spoiler. So obviously, if you've just written the ending, you can pick something else.
So my next book is set on an island, and I've just written a scene on the tugboat. So it's not very exciting. It's very unexciting part of the book, but the sort of getting on the boat. I mean, that's a liminal state, isn't it? Getting from the mainland onto the island on the boat. So it's just a scene that links those two.
Is it a real island that you set it on?
No, fictional actually. Yeah, I wanted. There's not enough on real islands that for me to do everything I want to do. So no, I've made it up.
Rachel, most recent scene?
Well, I'm doing a rewrite now. Just editing the next book that's coming out, and I've just edited at the beginning, and it's about where a woman gets a message, and she's changed her name because of things that happened and sort of started a new life somewhere else, and someone sends her a text message, but they use her old name. So it's kind of, I've just rewritten like the whole setup for what's going to happen.
Ooh, sounds good.
That sounds scary. The last I've read, it's not ghost scary. So this is, the Italian ghost story I'm writing, but I've just written a scene. So the setup for the story is that our protagonist is a young woman called Eva who is actually a Slav, so she's Slovenian, but she has hidden that because in 1930s Italy, Slavs were one of the persecuted minorities. So she has not told the man she has just married that she's Slovenian, and shortly after they marry, he starts working for the fascist party. So the scene I've just written is where, so she's a pianist, by the way, she's a piano teacher. they go to a party and she's dragged to the piano, and everyone, the people are saying, oh, we hear you're great at playing the piano, play the piano. So she plays a tune, and then they say, play Giovanezza. Now, Giovanezza means youth, and it was the fascist anthem. So she has to sit there playing the fascist anthem to this room full of people she knows will hate her if they realise who she really is. So that's cheerful.
More exciting than my tugboat, definitely.
I don't know. I said tugboat was pretty exciting.
And rolling on from that, Laura, who's watching, likes to ask if anyone's ever acted out a scene that they've written, and we've had some great answers to this as well.
Sorry, what do you mean acted out a theme?
Acted out a scene, so acted out something that you've written. So most recently, I'm trying to think of someone who's given us a really good answer to this. Mark Richards.
Yeah.
Writes books set in Whitby and the Yorkshire coast.
Yeah.
And he acted out a fight scene with his son that he wrote about on Whitby Pier.
Oh.
That involved him dangling off Whitby Pier apparently at one point. So have any of you ever acted out anything that you've written?
I've been to spiritualist services just to sort of do the research. My husband's a spiritualist, so it's not my belief system at all, but I've gone along with him a couple of times just to sort of. And unfortunately, I had to read it. They picked on me, so I was mortified, and I was just like sitting there nodding my head when they were saying stuff. But yeah, it's in this sort of name of research, but it's not really acting it out, but it's certainly going out of my comfort zone just to sort of be able to write the scene more realistic, really.
Rachel?
I had to go back when I was writing The Perfect House. I didn't really act it out, but when I was pregnant, I started writing a diary to my son, and I've kept them up like all through his life. So I don't write every night anymore, but so when he was tiny, I used to write obsessively in it, about things like, "Ooh, you said doggy today," and that kind of thing. And so when I was doing the research for the book, obviously, because everything's you just forget it all, I had to go back and reread all those things that had actually happened, and try and remember what it was like so I could put myself in the character. But acting things out, I think the one that I'm doing at the moment is like a murder story, so probably I don't know. I don't think I'll have a dry run on that one.
Yeah, I haven't, strictly speaking, acted anything out, but I did when I was writing The Story Keeper. It was pre-COVID times, so I was actually able to go away and go to the Isle of Skye. And I had lots of weekends alone on the Isle of Skye, and I have 2 small children, so that was, a delight to be away writing. Sorry, children. And I did a lot of because I was writing about the crofting community and the lands that were being taken from them in Scotland in the 1930s. So I did a lot of walking about and finding the remnants of the communities that had essentially been driven from their land, which was quite moving actually, because you'd go on these long walks and I wouldn't see a soul, and then you'd find sort of the stone foundations of some houses. So that wasn't really acting it out, but it was, with trying to ground myself in the place. But there was one moment during my so there's one of the characters in the book is a minister, and I'd set him in a real church at Broadchurch, and I thought, well, I want to go in and have a little look around so I can make sure I'm capturing it correctly. And I should say that a lot of the book is about hostility to outsiders, because it's about this young woman who comes from London, and a lot of the crofters are asking, well, who the hell are you to be asking us for our stories, etc., etc. Anyway, so I wandered into this church, and there was, I'm not sure if there was a service going on. There were people in there, but I just sort of stood at the back for a bit and looked around, and then I left. And the next minute, there was a man chasing after me, demanding to know who I was and what my business was there. And I had to sort of produce my card to show him that I was a writer and explain to him that I was writing about Skye, which was why I was there. But I didn't explain to him that I was writing a novel in which very bad things happened on the Isle of Skye. But it was quite an interesting experience of, questioning outsiders as to what the hell they were doing there, which was fair enough.
So, sticking with our group's favourite questions, one of the favourite things they like to ask is, what are your most memorable moments as an author?
Clearly, we don't remember them.
You're all like,
I can't remember anything before COVID and not going anywhere. I'm just trying to think.
remember anything that happened before yesterday. I mean, that was definitely one of the, you know, the scene I've just described in the church. That's something that will stick with me. It's being asked to sort of provide my credentials. But I'm just trying to think other moments. I mean, obviously when when your debut comes out, that's a big deal because, you know, all of us have been writing books for many years by that stage. And it's just an incredible thing to see your book in print. But I'm sure that's what most people say. There must be other stuff. Come on, you guys, think of something.
I've had, people I've lost touch with over the years. Or in fact, my father's got back in touch with people because of my book coming out and people recognising the name or recognising his name and so on. So that's been like a really, really nice thing that, sort of being out there a bit more public. People have got in touch and people have picked up my book in a bookshop or whatever, looked at the back and thought, I recognise her, from my photo, and it's from a previous, I've moved around a lot. People from Greece when I lived there or Liverpool when I was living there have just taken my book off the bookshelf and seen me and written to me and said, I didn't realise it was you. So that's been the sort of nice thing for me.
That's lovely. Rachel, any memorable moments?
I think because it's sort of the whole writing the thrillers thing's quite new for me. I think the most memorable for me has been my mum reading it and actually saying that she genuinely liked it and not just pretending, but actually genuinely saying, yeah, it's really good, I couldn't put it down. And that was really nice. Aww. Yeah, because it was quite nice that my mum was proud. I was really happy with that.
You forget when you're an author, though, that it's the little things people really like when I do the acknowledgements, I try and remember everybody, and people sort of like a year later when it comes out are really, really happy that you've mentioned them in the acknowledgements. And it's just such a minor thing for a writer, but you forget that people like it. And I called a cat in one of my books Charlie after my friend in Greece, and she still always says, and my cat appears in the novel, and it's just a tiny, tiny little thing really for a writer. And that's sort of a nice thing to do.
Yeah,
the acknowledgements are nice. Like I wrote The Perfect House because I was doing an MA in creative writing, and it was the book I wrote in the workshop for the first year. So because I did it part-time over 2 years. So I put the names of the people who helped me, from the university in the acknowledgements as well. And that was really nice because the start of it was like a sort of group thing because you do all the feedback on it. So that was good because I felt like they'd had a lot of input and really helped me at the beginning. So yeah, I agree with the acknowledgements. It's a nice thing to be able to do.
Dedications as well. I handed my sister the copy of the proof, and I hadn't warned her that it's for my sister Laura. She had a good cry. So that was sweet. I mean, I know writers, once they've written lots of books, tend to get to the stage where they've no idea who they should be dedicating their books to. But I'm still at the stage where it's very exciting to dedicate a book to someone. Although, given that my book features sort of missing children and really bad stuff, I'm not sure my sister will thank me one day.
Who else have you dedicated your books to then?
I did my first to my husband Jake. Oh, I've got a funny story about that actually. My husband Jake is what the first one said, or maybe it was just to Jake. Anyway, I was doing a signing in Heifer's in Cambridge. I don't know if you know, it's a lovely bookshop. And I opened my copy of The Story Keeper to sign it, and it said to John. And I thought, hang on, who the hell is John? It turned out that even though it was the same cover, it was someone else's book printed inside. And somehow they'd managed to print off like a whole ream of books with the wrong book. It was like something called The Secret Wife or something. I mean, it might have been a lot better than The Unseen. They might have been a good deal.
Oh no!
But, yeah, it was quite weird. But yeah, my first one was dedicated to my husband. My second was to my mother. I said to my mother Elizabeth, who introduced me to the fairies when I was very young, because she did read me scary fairy stories when I was a child, which I blame her for my love of dark fairy tales and gothic. And then the third, obviously, to my sister. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, so mine are various relatives. My first one was to my mum, who's not alive, and I always thought if I ever get a book published, my first one will be to my mum, who was the person who used to read me stories. So that was really important. And then various relatives. My husband's been dedicated book 2 and the latest one. So yes, I'm coming round to doing people twice now. And then my brothers for book 3, and Yeah, I can't even remember. Oh, so I have a friend who does all my proofreading for me, because even after it goes through a professional proofreader, there are always mistakes.
Yeah.
And so I have someone who does it for me as well, and I take him out for dinner, or for lunch or whatever, and I dedicate a book 4 to him.
Oh, that's
Who's perfect house dedicated to, Rachel?
To Tim, who's my other half, and my son Christian. And then I've got my dogs in the acknowledgement as well. So I've got 3
Were they
dogs.
actually helpful? Were they helpful to your book?
Yeah, they're very helpful. They like to come and sit on my knee when I'm typing, and they're constant companions. So because
my cats are in mine. Yeah,
I have to have them near me.
Oh, I feel a bit bad that I've not mentioned any of my animals in my acknowledgements, but I'm not sure. None of mine are that helpful. I've got a snake behind me, a lizard downstairs, and a very aged cat. None of them are much help with my writing, to be honest. I used to have a cat called George who would sit on my shoulder when I was writing. He was adorable, but yeah, he died not last Halloween, but the one before that, which is pretty, for a black cat, I thought was pretty gothic.
Oh.
If you're going to go out on Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my favourite question to ask at Author Chats is, would you make a graphic novel of one of your books? And I think spooky graphic novels work best of all.
I like graphic novels. I do read them occasionally, not as much as I used to. And I think of all of them, it's probably The Shadowing, the 6th one. So the second Rhiannon Ward would make, because of the workhouse, the sort of, that would look really, really great. Yeah. And also the fact that my main character Hester sees ghosts, so ghosts appear to her. And it would be really interesting how an artist would. I wouldn't be able to draw it myself. I'm terrible at drawing. When I used to teach, my students used to laugh at my blackboard stuff. But I think that would be interesting how an artist would interpret what's in my head of my main character seeing ghosts. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could do a graphic novel. I would love my novels to be illustrated. I always find it a shame that more novels are not illustrated. I absolutely love Edward Carey's books, and if you've read his, Little is his most famous one. But he's an illustrator as well as a very gifted writer, and he just creates these illustrations that just go so perfectly with the text. And I would love to be able to. In fact, they've sent me his new one, which is he did every day in lockdown. He did an illustration. And they're absolutely incredible. Let me show you a couple of them. This is a determined young man. They're just really kind of bizarre, but fantastic illustrations. And he did the sweetest thing for me. I chaired an event for him at Waterstones about Little, which is set in 18th century France, which is what they asked me because they knew I was writing this book. And I got talking to him about the automaton maker upon whom my novel is based, who's Jacques de Vaucanson. And a week or so after I'd done this event with me, he sent me a sketch of Jacques de Vaucanson that he'd done for me.
Oh, brilliant.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So sorry, I've gone slightly off topic. Rachel, graphic novels.
I don't know about a graphic novel, but I think I'd quite like the colour plates. Like sort of I don't know, maybe you could have one of the house and one of the characters and things. So that might be nice. Just have sort of occasional illustration. Like when I was a kid, I had a whole series of like classic novels that had all the colour plates in, and they were really nice. It's a shame that more sort of grown-up books don't have those, I think.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I wish they. Yeah, we don't just want the text. We love it. I'm trying to remember the name of her. Ewan Ivey, who wrote The Snow Child, her second one, The Bright Edge of the World. I don't know if you've read that.
No.
They did this fantastic historical novel about sort of a trip around the Antarctic. And they've included loads of photographs in that and drawings, and the letters actually appear as, you can't take them out, but they look like letters. And it was such a wonderful reading experience. It was something quite different. But I haven't seen that again recently. I guess it makes it a lot more expensive to print the book. But I think you're right that we do want it jazzing up a little bit.
I used to read a lot of Misty comics. Do you remember Misty in the late 70s, early 80s? It was a magazine like Jackie or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was all ghost stories, and they were sort of comic sort of strip, and they were great. They're sort of really tapped into sort of, because children often like ghost stories, don't they? There's
They
something
do, yeah.
that really appeals to children. The creepier the better, and that's, you know, what they did in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
This Misty magazine.
Although you say children like to be ghosts and to be scared, but I actually overstepped. So my son, because he knew I was writing this ghost novel, we started talking about ghosts, and I thought, oh, I know, I'll buy him. Did you ever have those Usborne books? So they had one on UFOs, one on ghosts, one on monsters. Do you remember them? So I bought him the ghosts one. And I read it with him, and he was absolutely fascinated by it, because it is, you know, really fascinating. It talks about, you know, Borley Rectory and some of the other sort of famous hauntings, and also about how animals react. Anyway, he loved it. Anyway, went to bed, reappeared at about 10:30, couldn't sleep. And basically, for days after that, he couldn't sleep. So I think children do love ghost stories, but they are properly scared by them. And I remember being, you know, properly terrified by ghost stories when I was young, which is of course why they stick with you, isn't it? That's why we love them, because they do, you know, when I think about the books that I did, the sort of the gothic ghostly fiction that has stayed with me, is the stuff that's really sort of scared me, or sort of got inside me and really sort of bothered me. And then and you know, when you talk about The Shining, I mean, I think that is a book that will always be with me, because it is a profoundly disturbing book. I mean, it's brilliant, but it is, you know, so disturbing. And same with Shirley Jackson. You know, it was, you know, Sarah, you were saying, you know, the lottery provoked outrage because it was a deeply upsetting book, story rather. And the same with, I think, some of Du Maurier's short stories. They're really, you know, I recently read Don't Look Now. I'd only ever seen the film before, and it is properly frightening, and I read it late at night and I couldn't go to sleep, and it's been a long time since that happened. I think that's why ghost stories are so powerful, that they do sort of get inside us and affect us, whether we're children or adults.
I think locations can be really important for stories as well. So I had a granddad who could tell amazing stories when I was little. And he used to tell you lots about Iceland and Vikings and stories like that. And that was always somewhere I wanted to visit when I was little. Is there anywhere I have visited as a grown-up because of it? Is there anywhere like around the world that you'd love to use as a setting for a story, or that you've visited because of a story?
I mean, I like sort of the deep south, the you know, Louisiana or somewhere like that. I'd love to go there and sort of look at the Gothic. Gothic. I can't see myself going, to be honest, because, I don't know. I might travel there one day, but I love the sort of, the whole Louisiana, Southern Gothic type feel.
I went to Havana, and I stayed in the Hotel Internacional, which is the really famous old hotel in there. And I think we stayed in the Nat King Cole suite, because that's where he'd stayed, and all the rooms were named after it. You know, there was like the Sinatra suite and everything. And I always think that'd be an amazing place to set a story, because it was such a strange place to be. But now I really want to set a story there, so I'll have to go back now. Write a Gothic fiction story set in Havana.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I went to Savannah many years ago, and New Orleans.
Brilliant.
And I really want to go back there. I don't think I'd be brave enough to set a story there, maybe because I'm not from there, but maybe one day. But I remember talking to Jane Harris about why she'd set her latest book in the Caribbean, and she said, well, Anna, it was because I wanted to go to the Caribbean. That's a very good way of looking at it. Why am I setting my books places I want to go? But of course, now I have set mine in Rome, and I can't bloody go to Rome. Although I might be able to go in the new year, but it's just too risky at the moment, because if I get, you know, stranded there because of COVID, then my husband's on his own with the kids. But actually, that sounds ideal. But I'm not sure he'd thank me. So the idea that we should set our book somewhere we want to go doesn't really work with COVID, unfortunately. But I mean, as I say, I do love the icy stories. I love the stories set in the Arctic and the Antarctic. I think I don't know how many of you saw the Terror TV series, which I thought was just terrifying and brilliant. So I would love to to set a book somewhere very icy and cold. But of course, you don't necessarily have to go there, because Steph Penny wrote The Tenderness of Wolves, to the the icy canyon, without having really left her room, because she was agoraphobic, and she somehow manages to summon up that, she did all her research sort of via books, and yet somehow managed to recreate that setting. But I think that's quite a gift. I know that when I was writing The Story Keeper, it only really came alive when I went to the Isle of Skye and I started walking about the land and started sort of, feeling that I was living in the novel. I think it's quite difficult to do that if you don't actually go somewhere. Well, I know it's quite difficult because I'm trying to write this novel set in Rome without going to Rome.
Yeah, my island that I'm writing about now is based on an island. It's based on a real life island, and I just want to go there. But even off the UK, it's sort of trying to plan it, and I think I'll end up writing the whole book first, and then, as you say, it's the little details that make it come alive, and I'll probably have to do it in the spring or something, go and see it, because I do admire writers who can do it, because Sharon Bolton has written 2 books set in the Falkland Islands, and I don't think she's been there.
Oh, is she not? Okay.
I don't think so. That might be wrong, but certainly after the first one, she said she hadn't been, and it does come alive, the island. So the talent.
It's a real. It's interesting that it's islands as well. I think islands are very good settings for ghost stories and gothic stories, and actually psychological thrillers as well, because they're their own contained space, aren't they? They're their own sort of. They can become their own frightening worlds, and lots of the kind of the best sort of ghost or psychological thrillers are set on islands, aren't they?
Or somewhere that's very contained or cut off.
Yeah,
definitely. And I suppose we all felt it during COVID, didn't we? That we were sort of stuck on our own little island, which was our house and our garden. But it's that sort of it taps into that sort of psychological feel that you can't go anywhere. It's like, I live quite high up in England, so I'm in one of the highest villages in England, and we get snowed in a lot. And I know it's coming. I've got a house full of food. Don't need to go anywhere, and it's still the thought I can't get out, and it plays with your mind, really.
The Shining. You're living in The Shining.
Doesn't last 5 months.
But you're right.
I was lucky in COVID. I managed to still go out and go to work for quite a lot of it, even in the lockdowns, which was quite nice. You've touched on it with Misty, and you've talked about the Osborne books. What did you like to read as a child?
So I read a lot of crime fiction. It's Enid Blyton, Famous Five, Secret Seven. That's what I read a lot of as a child. But I also used to read ghost stories. There's a book called Leo Possessed by Dilys Owen, which I absolutely loved. So any sort of ones that aren't very famous, I love the sort of ghost stories. And then when I was 12, I discovered Agatha Christie. So that was me into crime, really.
Yeah, I was wondering whether, because my son's 10 and he loves crime mystery novels, I was wondering, is he too young for Agatha Christie? Maybe not.
Yeah, I suppose between Enid Blyton and Agatha Christie, there was, do you remember the Nancy Drew books?
Yes, I love Nancy Drew.
The Hardy Boys and so on, so I read them in between. But,
yeah, Nancy Drew. What about you, Rachel?
I read so much when I was a kid. I think I read Enid Blyton. I was obsessed by all the Faraway Tree books, and then then on to the Secret Seven and the Famous Five and Mystery at all the different various places, and the Island of Adventure, all those ones. And then when I got a bit older, like during the school holidays, I just used to read all my parents' books, which is why I've read so many things I shouldn't have read when I was younger. I'd be horrified if my child had read them. But I remember there was one summer, and I must have been really young, and I read the whole of the Ed McBain books, the 87 Precincts. Yeah, I read all those when I must have been about 12, and read the whole series of those. And then, so I got into like the crime and the sort of spooky books quite early. Then did I read? My parents had some Alfred Hitchcock edited some stories. And I remember reading that when I was really young as well, and they were really scary. And even now, all these years after, I can still remember sort of reading them and being in the house, and it'd be like August in the summer holidays, and I was still sitting on the sofa looking behind me in the sunshine, being terrified. So Yeah, loads. I just ferocious reader when I was a kid.
My mum loved reading Mills and Boon, so I read loads of Mills and Boon when I was about 10 or 11, just because they were there, you know.
Are they quite racy? I've never actually read them.
Yeah. My mum always thought if they were really racy, they were written by a man. I don't know. But, you know. And the doctor and nurse ones and so on. I haven't read one since I was about 12, so I don't know what they're like now. But
amazing.
What about you, Anna?
Yeah, so I mean, like you both, I was, and I think all readers probably, I was writers rather. I was a voracious reader as a child. Well, I still am. I still read far too much. But yeah, I started the first books that I remember really thinking, understanding what books were and how magical they could be were the Narnia series. Those are the ones that really got me into reading. And then quite quickly I found, basically I was obsessed with horses as a young girl. I never had a horse because my parents couldn't afford a horse, but I was obsessed with them to the extent that I would go and like muck out the local studios that stables. That was my idea of a good time on a Saturday. But I read all these pony mysteries. There were all these. The first one I read was Christine Pullen Thompson.
I read all those. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, and my friend Flickering. Yeah, all those. Loved them.
Yes, I absolutely loved those. So that's what really got me into mysteries. I think the pony mysteries. And then, I read all the Nancy Drew books, although at the time, of course, I didn't realise that there was no Carolyn, whatever her face is.
Caroline Keene, there was.
Caroline Keene. There was actually lots and lots of different authors writing as her. And in fact, who is it I was talking to? I was talking to someone on Twitter who was like, oh, yes, I was Caroline Keene as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was like, that's a real claim to fame. That's amazing.
That really shocked me when I was older and discovered that Caroline Keene didn't exist.
Well, that upset you?
Yeah, it just really shocked me because I'd grown up thinking that, I loved Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys and things like that. And I thought that was a real author.
Yeah, talking about acting out a theme, I used to make my poor friend. We had this caravan. You're getting a good idea of my childhood now. No horse caravan. Anyway, we had this caravan where my friends and I would go and we would enact Nancy Drew. Yeah.
We have 3 minutes left of our panel. So do you want to finish us off with a reminder of yourself and your books? We'll start with Anna this time and go back round because we started with Sarah last time.
Yeah, a reminder. Who am I? Yes, so I'm Anna. I write sort of dark historical and gothic fiction. And as I said, my books have got ever creepier. I started writing historical crime. I've ended up writing a ghost story. Although the one I am now writing a contemporary crime one as well. Because I'm a lawyer as well. So I'm now writing a legal political thriller. God knows what will happen with that, but something a bit different. Anyway, that's me.
Great. Rachel?
So I write as R P Bolton, and my book is The Perfect House, and it's kind of a spooky, modern version of the yellow wallpaper, but quite different.
Amazing. I'm going to read it immediately.
Definitely.
Sounds great. Sarah?
I write contemporary crime as Sarah Ward, and I've written 2 historical gothic thrillers, The Quickening, set in the 1920s, and The Shadowing, set in the late 1830s.
And then all that's left for me to say thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having us, and thank you to our audience as well.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.